Unfortunately, we do have to cover the Democratic National Convention. So let's do that. Right now, the Democratic Party is holding its convention in Chicago to formally nominate Kamala Harris. On Monday, some 20,000 people protested outside, demanding an end to U.S. arms shipments to Israel, and an even bigger protests are expected today and on Thursday when Harris is set to give her acceptance speech. On Monday, the Democratic National Committee unveiled its 2024 platform. The policies it sets in support of Israel effectively reaffirm the party's support for the genocide, and they are a slap in the face to the party's voters, the majority of whom think that there should be an end to this genocide. Back in March, a national YouGov poll, one of many with similar findings, found that a majority of Americans agreed with the statement: the U.S. should stop weapon shipments to Israel until Israel discontinues its attacks on the people of Gaza. Among Democrats, the number who wanted an arms embargo rose to almost 2/3. Just 14% of Democrats disagreed. But of course, none of that is being reflected in what's happening on the convention stage in Chicago or in the platform itself. Ali, why don't you take us through some of the key points? And you were recently on Rania Khalek's program on Breakthrough News, going through more of this in detail. But yeah, take us through what this means.
Yeah, I would love to. But just before we do that, I just want to give an update for those who aren't following it closely. Last week, we had 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 from the March on the DNC Coalition, and he was absolutely fantastic. And the organizing in Chicago has been incredible. I haven't been able to go to any of the protests yet, but some of our colleagues have. And I just want to say, when we spoke to 𝐓𝐡𝐞 last week, they were waiting for the city to issue the permits. And they did so that night after we spoke to 𝐓𝐡𝐞, and the city tried to impose severe restrictions on the protests, banning a stage, banning amplification, banning portable toilets, banning all the things you need to have an effective protest and a safe gathering of so many people. And because of this strength of the organizing, when the coalition threatened to go to court, the city backed down. So I just, again, the message that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 was giving us is that organizing works. And so that's just to encourage people. But back to what's happening inside the convention hall. And we have just one of the things that's just so striking, the first page of the Democratic Party platform, and it's a 90-page document. You can find it online if you really must. But it starts with a land acknowledgement, and that's a statement honoring the indigenous people who lived on the land of Chicago and the surrounding area before the ethnic cleansing and genocide by the European settlers who founded the United States. And as you can see, they say, quote, "We honor the communities native to this continent and recognize that our country was built on indigenous homelands. We pay our respects to the millions of indigenous people throughout history who've protected our lands, waters, and animals." I just have to point out,
cynical.
Yeah, the shamelessness of a party pretending to care about indigenous rights while it is actively assisting ethnic cleansing and genocide in Palestine. And of course, by the way, indigenous people in this country are still having to struggle, and in Canada, of course, across North America, for their rights against both Democratic and Republican administrations, and in Canada against the Liberal government, which is so good at shedding crocodile tears about reconciliation. While who was it who once called Canada is 3 mining companies standing on each other's shoulders in a trench coat? So anyway, but I did a quick word count, and speaking of Canada, in the Democratic Party platform, Canada is mentioned precisely once. Mexico is mentioned 8 times. Of course, those are the 2 direct neighbors of the United States and among its biggest and most important trading partners, Russia, which the United States has decided it wants as an enemy, is mentioned 15 times. Israel is mentioned 29 times. You know, why is the Democratic Party unfairly singling out Israel to mention it so many times in its platform? Very strange. Now, there are about 5 pages covering what the party's policies are on what it calls the Middle East and North Africa. And overall, I would characterize it as extremely militaristic and warmongering. Neocon is what I called it on Rania Khalek's show, and I'll repeat that here. And I'll say more about that. But I want to talk about how it really is absolutely anti-Palestinian, directly anti-Palestinian. And so if we look at the next excerpt there, it has a whole section on October 7th. And this is just a bit of it. It says, President Biden and Vice President Harris have unequivocally denounced Hamas's brutal attack on Israel on October 7th, condemned the gruesome violence, including conflict-related sexual violence demonstrated by Hamas, and made clear that the United States wants to see Hamas defeated. So notice the words there: brutal, gruesome. And something interesting here. Kamala Harris, we've talked about this previously, has been part of spreading the October 7th rape hoax, which we've now debunked I don't know how many times on this program. And you know, there is still not a single identified credible case of rape occurring on October 7th. And this is genocidal atrocity propaganda. But something interesting here, they don't use the word rape. Now, they use this term conflict-related sexual violence. And again, we've discussed this previously when we discussed the UN report by Pramila Patten that, again, found no corroboration of Israel's rape claims at all. And the UN uses the term conflict-related sexual violence. It's a really vague and broad term that encompasses all sorts of things. For example, it includes videos taken by Hamas fighters which show women wearing revealing clothing. The UN considers that to be conflict-related sexual violence. The important thing here is it doesn't mean rape. It could include rape, but it is not rape. Conflict-related sexual violence is far broader and vaguer. So what I think happened here, this is just my speculation, is that the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, wrote this, said, how can we continue to spread this genocidal propaganda without saying the word rape? And I think that's a recognition by them that actually the evidence isn't there and that we have really destroyed this narrative. But, you know, perhaps casual or less informed readers won't make that distinction between rape and the term they use here. And they do use the word rape elsewhere in the platform, talking about what they're doing for victims of rape in the United States and so on, you know, as part of their agenda, unrelated to October 7th. So it's not as if they're not willing to use the word rape, but they specifically didn't use it in this context. And I think that's notable. Now, by contrast, with this demonization of Palestinians and the continued spreading of Israeli atrocity propaganda, there's not one single statement in the platform that holds Israel responsible for anything bad. Look at this language. We can go to the next slide. That gives us some sense of, hang on, I'm on my wrong tab there. So you can see that they talk about the immense civilian pain and extreme suffering being caused by the conflict, including the displacement and death of so many innocent people in Gaza. And then they say many vulnerable civilians are suffering deadly consequences of the Israel-Hamas war. Residents of Gaza have been displaced and food security has been severe. And what you notice there is that these statements are either in the passive voice, or you know, we have no idea who's doing all these terrible things.
It's a natural disaster. It's just naturally occurring famine and displacement. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and there's more of that, but I'm just, you know, giving you examples here. So the Democrats are telling us here that they are not the party or the government that is going to hold Israel accountable or stop Israel from doing these crimes. Because if they're not willing to even say that Israel is doing them, they're certainly not willing to act on that. So it's very notable, that contrast. Now, let's look briefly at the Democrats' broader regional policies. And this is a slightly awkward screenshot because it's over across 2 pages. But they brag about the Biden administration, or let's call it the Biden-Harris administration, because they really want to emphasize that Kamala Harris can take credit for Joe Biden's supposed achievements. They talk about how Biden has authorized precision airstrikes on key Iranian-linked targets. Then they say President Biden ordered military strikes alongside allies against Houthi targets, that's against Yemen. And they brag about and Yemen, of course, is trying to stop a genocide. So they're bragging about bombing people and punishing them for the crime of trying to stop a genocide. And they brag about leading a coalition of countries to defend Israel. We talked about that with Dr. Marandi. From Iran's retaliation in April for the bombing of the Iranian consulate in Damascus. So they're trying to guarantee Israel's ability to continue the genocide and carry out its crimes with impunity. So that's what the Democrats are bragging about. And the next thing, we can move to the next slide, is really, truly incredible, because they want to draw a contrast. They say, we're bombing here, we're bombing there, we're sending billions to Israel, we're defending Israel so that it can continue to commit genocide. And they say, all this stands in sharp contrast to Trump's fecklessness and weakness in the face of Iranian aggression during his presidency. So the Democrats want you to know that they are the more warmongering party. And this is just astonishing. They say here, in January 2020, when Iran, for the first and only time in its history, directly launched ballistic missiles against US troops in Western Iraq, Trump mocked the resulting traumatic brain injuries suffered by dozens of American service members as mere headaches, and again took no action. I have a question for the class. What's missing from this paragraph? Anyone remember what Iran fired missiles at US bases for in January 2020?
Qasem Soleimani assassination?
Exactly.
Could it be?
Exactly, yeah.
Could it be that the U.S. assassinated a top military commander of a different country? Yeah.
Exactly. So they leave that out because Donald Trump ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani while he was in Iraq. So this is a very Israel-like operation. If you think about the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Iran, but it was ordered by Donald Trump, and he murdered Qasem Soleimani while he was on a peace mission in Iraq. That was a blatant, reckless, and criminal act of war by Donald Trump. But the Democrats don't mention it at all because it does not fit with their narrative that Trump is supposedly weak and not as violent and warmongering as they are. So they just leave it out.
And they completely supported that assassination anyway.
Of course they did. But right now they want you to believe, you know, the distinction they're trying to draw is, you want to bomb Iran, you want to bomb Yemen, you want to bomb all these countries, then Kamala Harris is your candidate. That's who you vote for if you want more war. That's what they're saying. And then they say here, the administration, again, we talked about this with Dr. Mohammed Marandi, they say the administration continues to manage the fallout from Trump's reckless and short-sighted decision to pull the United States out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action to constrain Iran's nuclear weapons ambitions. But of course, the Biden-Harris administration has done absolutely nothing to restore that deal, even though that was one of their promises. And instead, what they're doing is bragging about bombing so-called Iranian-linked targets. So remember the saying, guys, when people tell you who they are, believe them.